Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. So you can have all the grammatical rules like completely locked down in your head, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you perfectly construct this flawless sentence, but then you still completely freeze the second a barista looks up and asks for your coffee order.
It happens to the best of us.
Right. Why does the language center of your brain suddenly just crash exactly when you need it most? Well, we are getting straight into the psychology of language anxiety today.
Yeah, it is a truly fascinating neurological disconnect.
Right.
Today, we're analyzing a highly practical, conversational guide put together by two instructors, Michael and Mary.
And it's a great guide.
It really is. We are extracting the core psychological frameworks from their material to explain why overthinking is the absolute enemy of fluency and, well, how you can override that biological response.
We're looking at this through the lens of speaking English in daily life, but honestly, the mechanics apply to anyone trying to operate a new skill under pressure. The mission here isn't to walk through a grammar textbook or review vocabulary lists. We're going to break down how to bypass that mental freeze, stop agonizing over perfection, and actually communicate naturally.
Right, and to do that, we first have to look at the anatomy of the freeze itself. Before we talk about what specific words to say, we really have to understand the cognitive mechanism that causes our brains to betray us.
Betray us in high-stakes social interactions, right?
Exactly. So the guide features this highly relatable anecdote about Mary experiencing this exact phenomenon. She was trying to order at a cafe.
Oh, I remember this part.
Yeah, and in the safety of her own mind, the sentence was already perfectly formed. I would like a coffee.
It's polite, it's simple, the syntax is flawless.
Perfectly flawless, but the moment the spotlight hits her, her brain just hits a wall. And what comes out of her mouth instead is, coffee, give me.
Followed immediately by a deeply awkward smile.
Yeah, the classic awkward smile.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I'm picturing this like a computer processing way too much data. If you are calculating verb tenses, subject-verb agreement, vocabulary retrieval, and managing social anxiety all at the exact same time, does focusing on perfection literally overload your brain's RAM?
Well, your computer analogy is a really solid starting point, but it's actually more severe than just running too many heavy programs at once.
Really? How so?
It's an issue of cognitive load, but it's coupled with a system-wide security alert. When Mary is standing at that counter, her brain isn't just processing syntax.
Right, there are people around her.
Exactly. The social pressure of the interaction triggers the amygdala, which is, the brain's primary threat detection center. That triggers a mild fight or flight response.
Wow, so it's actual panic.
Yeah. And the immediate physiological result is that you're working memory, so your brain's RAM gets actively throttled down to near zero.
So the system isn't just full, it is actively killing non-essential processes to deal with what it perceives as a threat.
Precisely. And in that high-stress moment, complex grammar is deemed entirely non-essential by your nervous system.
It just throws it out the window.
Right. The brain reverts to the absolute most basic primal output it can muster to survive the interaction and get the resource it needs.
Which is why she says, coffee. Give me.
Yes. But what's fascinating here is how the source material reframes that moment of perceived failure.
So how do they reframe it?
Well, the awkward smile Mary gave actually did far more heavy lifting in that interaction than the grammar ever could have.
That makes a lot of sense.
We assume that native speakers are rigorously judging our syntactic accuracy, but human beings are hyper-tuned to infer intent and meaning from context and nonverbal cues.
Yeah, the barista does not care about the modal verb would. They just need to know what to put in the cup and whether you are a threat.
Exactly.
And that warm smile diffuses the social tension immediately. Which is, I guess, why the guide advocates so heavily for relying on rote, almost brutally simple phrases.
Just basic building blocks.
Right, like, hi, my name is, I'm from.
By relying on those rote blocks, you bypass the working memory bottleneck entirely. You aren't dynamically constructing a sentence on the fly.
You're just pulling it from a file.
Basically, yeah, you're retrieving a single, unchangeable unit of sound that you've memorized as a whole. It requires vastly less cognitive processing power.
Which leaves you with more mental bandwidth to actually manage the social anxiety of the interaction.
Right.
So if utilizing rote phrases effectively lowers the cognitive load, how does that translate to the chaotic environment of the real world? Because the guide divides public interactions into two distinct buckets.
Transactional interactions and relational interactions.
Yes. Now, the transactional side seems incredibly straightforward. Ordering food, buying a ticket at a train station. The absolute golden rule they establish is to start as simply as humanly possible.
Relying on phrases like, can I have, or I would like.
Right.
Transactional interactions operate on a highly predictable linguistic script. The parameters are rigidly defined by the environment.
You want to purchase food, and the server wants to facilitate that purchase.
Exactly. Stripping away all the complex pleasantries and defaulting to, I would like a sandwich and a coffee, like Michael does in the Sources roleplay, keeps you safely within the bounds of that script.
Because you don't need to be eloquent to successfully complete a transaction.
No, not at all.
But then the guide pushes learners toward relational interactions, and this involves talking to strangers.
Right, the tricky part.
Yeah, they suggest initiating small talk with situational questions at a bus stop, like asking, is this seat free? Or is the bus usually late?
Standard small talk.
But this is where the whole system seems like it would completely fall apart. I mean, ordering a sandwich is a closed loop. Talking to a stranger is completely chaotic.
It definitely feels that way.
So how does memorizing a simple phrase like, is the bus usually late, possibly prepare you for the infinite number of unpredictable things a stranger might say back? I mean, they could launch into a geopolitical rant about public infrastructure.
They could. And that fear of the unpredictable response is the primary barrier for even highly advanced learners.
Because they feel trapped.
They assume that initiating a conversation binds them to a contract of perfect comprehension.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we have to completely shift our perspective on what those specific phrases are designed to do. They aren't the opening lines of a 10-minute scripted dialogue. They are social pings.
Like a submarine using sonar. You are just sending out a signal to see what bounces back.
That is a perfect way to put it. A signal that simply opens the door to potential connection. The guide establishes a crucial foundational rule for these moments.
Which is?
Don't try to be perfect, try to be clear.
I really like that.
When you ask a stranger about the bus, they instinctively recognize the social ritual. They aren't expecting a rigorous debate on municipal transit policies.
Right, it's just a polite exchange.
And this linguistic predictability applies even to the most standard, ubiquitous greetings like, how are you?
Oh, the classic trap. People freeze because they think they need to actually report on their current physical and emotional state of being in a grammatically complex way.
Exactly. But a native speaker asking, how are you, is really just performing a verbal handshake.
It's an acknowledgement of shared existence in a space, not a request for a psychological evaluation.
Yes. Replying with a simple, I'm good or not bad, isn't a failure to utilize your advanced vocabulary flashcards.
Right.
It is a perfect execution of linguistic pragmatics. Natural, unscripted conversation is inherently fragmented, brief, and incredibly messy.
It looks absolutely nothing like the eloquent multi-paragraph dialogues printed in language textbooks.
Definitely not.
Okay, so we know we need to lower the cognitive load to bypass the amygdala hijack, and we understand the pragmatics of the social ping.
Right.
But having that intellectual knowledge still doesn't prevent the physical freeze when you're standing in line with 50 people behind you.
Yeah.
Mental preparation is useless if you haven't prepared the physical mechanism of speech.
That's where the practice comes in.
Right, the source offers a private training ground for this. But I have to be honest, standing in an empty kitchen and narrating my life out loud feels completely ridiculous.
Yeah. You're referring to the guide's recommendation to practice daily life phrases.
Yeah, saying things out loud like, I'm hungry, what's for dinner, or I'm going to sleep entirely alone in your home.
Right.
Does narrating your mundane daily activities to an empty room actually achieve anything neurologically? Or is this just a strange confidence trick? I mean, is there tangible value here, or is it just like a boxer shadow boxing in the mirror before a fight?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of neuroplasticity and motor learning, the shadow boxing analogy actually holds up beautifully.
Really?
Yeah. Speaking a new language isn't just a cognitive retrieval task. It's a highly complex physical motor skill.
That makes sense.
Your mouth, your tongue, your diaphragm, and your vocal cords all have to physically contort into unfamiliar shapes to produce foreign phones.
So by speaking aloud in an empty room, you're physically myelinating the neural pathways required to produce those specific sounds effortlessly.
Exactly. You are removing the physical friction so the mental friction doesn't completely derail you in public.
So when Mary is panicking at the cafe, if her mouth already knows the exact physical choreography of the words, I would like a coffee, she has a much higher chance of actually outputting the phrase.
Even while her brain is sounding the alarm, yes. Furthermore, practicing alone normalizes the auditory feedback of your own voice speaking the target language.
That's huge.
It is. A massive under-discussed component of the language freeze is the sheer shock of hearing yourself sound different.
Wow, I never thought of that.
Yeah, and beyond this solitary physical practice, the guide also prepares learners for when the real-world performance inevitably derails.
The panic moments, like when the waiter mumbles or the bus stop stranger actually does launch into a rapid-fire rant,
Right.
and you realize you have zero idea what is happening.
The guide provides specific conversational life rafts for those exact moments. Phrases like, "Can you repeat that?
Hmm.
Sorry, I didn't understand," or "Can you speak slowly?"
But advanced learners
Okay.
often treat those phrases as an admission of absolute defeat. Like, if you have to deploy the life raft and ask someone to repeat themselves, you have supposedly failed the interaction.
And expose yourself as an imposter,
Exactly.
which is a massive psychological blind spot that holds learners back for years. Asking for clarification is actually a highly advanced conversational management technique.
That's a great way to reframe it.
Native speakers ask each other to repeat themselves constantly. We mishear things, we get distracted, the environment is loud.
So deploying those phrases proves you are actively engaged in the shared goal of mutual understanding.
Rather than just nodding along passively and letting the conversation die, it shows competence, not failure.
Which brings us directly to what I think is the most counterintuitive takeaway from the entire source material. We've tackled the cognitive load, the social pragmatics, the physical myelination,
Yeah.
but none of it matters if you fall into the ultimate trap of language acquisition.
The perfectionism trap.
Right. The crippling assumption that you must internally verify a sentence's absolute grammatical correctness before you allow it to leave your mouth.
The guide highlights this as the single biggest mistake beginners and advanced learners make.
Because while you are standing there in silence, furiously calculating the verb tenses and trying to assemble a flawless sentence, the moment simply passes.
It's gone.
The conversational window closes, and the world moves on without you.
The opportunity for human connection is completely lost because you were waiting for the perfect entry point that never arrived.
And Mary shares an incredibly inspiring story in the source text to illustrate this.
She does, yeah.
She describes a person she met who spoke very basic, what you might classify as broken English. He made grammatical errors constantly.
Right.
But the defining difference was that he spoke it every single day, and he spoke it with relentless, unwavering confidence.
Because he threw himself headfirst into the chaotic reality of the language without waiting for permission from a grammar book.
Exactly. And his fluency rapidly outpaced people who'd have been studying for years. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The great irony of language acquisition is that broken English, delivered quickly and confidently in the flow of a conversation,
Is actually a vastly more effective communication tool.
yes, more effective than grammatically flawless English that arrives 30 seconds too late.
This raises an important question about how we fundamentally define good English, or, good communication in any language.
Right.
Is communication defined by flawless syntax, or is it defined by the successful transfer of an idea from one human brain to another?
The guide heavily advocates for the latter.
Very heavily.
The traditional education system conditions us to believe it is purely about the syntax. You get a failing grade on a test if the grammar is wrong, even if your underlying idea is brilliant and timely.
But the real world does not grade you on a binary of correct or incorrect grammar.
No, the real world grades you on participation. You fail the interaction if your timing is wrong, even if your grammar was perfectly constructed in your head.
Right. If you synthesize the core takeaways from Michael and Mary's frameworks, the message is that every messy, grammatically incorrect interaction is a necessary data point for your brain.
So true.
Every time you speak, you are participating in the ecosystem of the language. You do not need a massive vocabulary to start. You do not need perfect pronunciation.
You need the courage to tolerate the temporary discomfort of being misunderstood and the willingness to speak daily.
Exactly.
It is entirely about participation over perfection. And to really drive this paradigm shift home, the source material actually issues a direct interactive challenge to you, the listener.
Oh, right. The speaking challenge.
Yeah. It asks you to literally say out loud, right now, wherever you happen to be, "Hi, my name is, I'm learning English."
Saying it with absolute confidence, regardless of who might be around.
So if you are listening to this on a commute or walking your dog or making dinner, just do it. Shadowbox for a second. "Hi, my name is, I'm learning English."
Claim it. Own the fact that you are an active learner. Because saying it out loud strips away the shame of the process.
It frames your identity, not as someone who is continuously failing to be a perfect native speaker, but as someone who is actively and bravely acquiring a highly complex new skill.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? If we zoom out and look at the entire psychological landscape we've unpacked today, the journey of overcoming the fear of speaking English is the exact opposite of what we typically use it is.
Right.
It isn't about locking yourself in a quiet room for another 5 years to study thicker, more complex grammar textbooks until you finally feel ready. Because, as we've learned, you will never feel completely ready for the unpredictability of human interaction.
No amount of theoretical preparation in a vacuum can inoculate you against the chaos of reality.
Overcoming the fear is about speaking much sooner than you think you should. It is about keeping your phrases incredibly simple to protect your working memory from the amygdala hijack.
And shadowboxing in your kitchen to build that vital physical muscle memory.
Yes, and above all else, it is about accepting that mistakes are not an accidental byproduct of the process. They are the process itself.
Well said. To everyone listening, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope the psychological frameworks and practical insights we've pulled from Michael and Mary's guide offer a new lens on your own language journey.
We encourage you to take these lessons out of your headphones and directly into the real world. Go order that coffee, ask someone if the bus is late, throw the social ping into their court.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day.
Please do.
We put a tremendous amount of pressure on ourselves to sound perfectly native. But think about how native speakers actually operate in their own language.
Good point.
They constantly make grammatical errors. They use hyperlocal slang that makes no sense. They completely lose their train of thought mid-sentence. They stumble over their pronunciations, and they do it all without feeling an ounce of shame.
So if the native speakers are out there cheerfully breaking all the rules of their own language, why should you, as someone learning it as a second language, demand absolute perfection from yourself?
You wouldn't.
So don't. Just get out there, open your mouth, and keep moving.